I'm Charles Kuck, law professor and immigration lawyer. I'm here today to answer your questions from the internet. This is Immigration Support. This is a question from Zambala HODL. Okay, I realize I don't understand the difference between a visa, a green card, a refugee, or an asylum seeker. A visa is actually a stamp that a consular officer at a U.S. consulate puts in a foreign national's passport to allow them to come to the United States and apply for entry at the airport or at a border. For a visa, there's many different bases. For example, you can get a visa to visit the United States. You can get a work visa. Overall, there's 24 different types of visas to just come here temporarily, as well as an additional 30 immigrant visas to immigrate to the United States. A green card is actually evidence of somebody's permanent residence in the United States. They call it a green card because it's green. Kind of looks like a driver's license. A refugee is an individual who is outside the United States, who goes through about a 2-year vetting process and ultimately can become a permanent resident. That refugee has to show that they've been persecuted in some way abroad. An asylum seeker, on the other hand, is someone who is in the United States either with or without a visa, or who comes to the border and asks to apply for asylum. They have to show to an immigration judge or the immigration officials that they have a fear of persecution in their home country because of their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or because they are a member of a social group. For example, because they're gay or they're lesbian. This question is from CoolDude010. How hard is it to legally immigrate to the United States from the Mexican border if you are not a citizen? It's basically impossible. If you just show up at the border, you have no legal right to remain in the United States, nor do you have a legal right to immigrate to the United States unless you're applying for asylum. And even then, you're likely to be detained. And at that point, you will have to show an immigration judge that you have this fear of persecution of returning to your home country. These types of decisions usually take months, if not a couple of years, to adjudicate, during which time you might be detained. This question is from J. Sanchez 030. Why are Americans who live overseas called expats, but everyone else who does the same is called an immigrant? Expats is simply a term used by corporate America as they send U.S. workers abroad for temporary assignments. Generally speaking, if somebody stays in that country, they become immigrants to that country. There are people on expat contracts to the United States. You just never hear about that. This question from Raw21 Red. In this day and age, can you still marry someone for a green card? I tell individuals when they come to meet with me, you have to fall in love first. It's not just, hey, I'm gonna go find somebody to get married. That's called marriage fraud. And that is quite illegal in the United States. So the U.S. Immigration Service pays a lot of attention to marriage cases, especially when the couple looks like they don't really belong together. Somebody marries someone from another country and they don't speak each other's languages. At that point, the Immigration Service may have questions about whether this is a real marriage. Generally speaking, when you marry a U.S. citizen and you are approved for a green card or permanent residence, you're only approved for 2 years. At the end of those 2 years, you have to go back to the Immigration Service and prove that you physically live together. Immigration requires, generally speaking, commingling of assets, shared bank account statements, for example, living in the same location with a lease in both your names. Immigration has an entire task force of men and women who go out and check whether this documentation is real. And I will tell you, they do find people who try to scam this system. Do some people get away with it? Absolutely. Do most people get away with it? Absolutely not. I love this question from Dirk Losma. Where do Americans immigrate to? Did you know that today there are over 1 million Americans living in Mexico? It's the highest source country for receiving Americans. You can go anywhere in the world and you will find a, quote, expat community. There's been a large increase in the number of Americans leaving the country since Donald Trump became president the second time. A lot of other countries are welcoming Americans, generally because Americans have money. Americans create jobs. Americans have experience that maybe their countries lack. This question from Relative Increase 2215. H-1B laid off. What are my options? An H-1B is a work visa sponsored by a U.S. employer for a foreign national. Under our current immigration laws, when an individual who has an H-1B is fired or quits their job, they have a 60-day grace period in which to leave the United States, change their status to visitor, or file a new employer H-1B if they want to remain here. If they don't leave before the end of those 60 days, they will be put into deportation proceedings and ultimately deported from the United States. This question is from Mammoth Mastodon 294. Can Trump take away green cards or make it more difficult than current? Yes, permanent residents can actually lose their permanent residence under a variety of circumstances. For example, if they're convicted of a crime, within 5 years of getting their green card, they can be put into deportation proceedings and their residence can be taken away. If they stay outside the country longer than 180 days a year, their green card can be taken away. The other reason that you see today in the news is individuals who may have misrepresented themselves to get permanent residence, or they didn't fill out the forms truthfully. In that circumstance, their residence can be taken away. Nothing is secure until you're a U.S. citizen. There are circumstances under which citizenship can be revoked. Generally, it's because you have lied on your citizenship application. There is a specific question that most people kind of laugh at that is on the application. Have you committed a crime for which you have not been arrested? If you have committed a crime for which you have not been arrested and you're subsequently arrested, they can use that as a basis to take your citizenship away. This question is from Eoff Jim, and I love this question. Is Trump's gold card for $5 million a good or a bad idea? If you're asking people that want to buy residence for $5 million, it's probably a good idea, but it's likely a bad idea for everybody else. We have a visa called the EB-5 immigrant visa. This allows individuals to invest $1 billion in a business in the United States and create 10 jobs through that investment. That person gets a conditional green card, good for 2 years. So the program already exists. Since 1990, individuals have invested this amount of money into the country, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. Why you'd want to pay more for it, I don't know. Europe and other countries around the world have created a golden visa. Portugal has brought in thousands of individuals willing to invest somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $500,000 and obtain residence, and quickly they obtain citizenship within about 3 years. This question from Red Smill, 618-9398. What jobs do immigrants take from Americans? They don't take any jobs from Americans. America is not just a pie that's this big. America is a pie that grows every time somebody else comes to the United States. Now, immigrants do some jobs that Americans will not do. Everybody acknowledges this. There are very few Americans with children who tell their children, Bobby, you should drop out of school and go pluck chickens at the chicken factory. We're constantly telling our children to get skilled jobs, to go to college, to go to trade school. We're not telling them to do unskilled jobs, which we still have a need for in the United States. There are likely salaries at which you could pay individuals to do these very difficult jobs. But then you'd have to sell the product of those jobs at prices that nobody would buy that product. By a continual supply of immigrants to the United States, you enable us to grow our economy and at the same time allow jobs that would likely be outsourced to other countries to remain in the United States. Silicon Valley is, for example, a great example of this. 49% of the companies started up in Silicon Valley in the last 30 years have been started up by immigrants. People who are bringing their ideas to a country where those ideas can be put into action. This question is from Lunatic24. How much do immigrants contribute to the USA GDP? Immigrants generally are younger, so virtually all immigrants in America today actually work in jobs. That's true whether they're undocumented or documented. The undocumented population are not getting welfare. They're not getting benefits. They're not using free healthcare. They're working every day in jobs that Americans won't do. A lot of people complain about immigrants that have come to the border illegally. But why are these individuals coming to the border illegally? Nobody invited them to come, except we did. And I'm not talking about politicians. I'm talking about our economy. Our economy has invited people to come. Now, that has been cut off in this administration, so you're seeing far fewer people come to the border because they don't feel invited anymore. Today, if we were to deport all of the undocumented in the United States, we would go into an instant recession because we have nobody to backfill those jobs in the United States. So this idea that immigrants are a drag on our economy is one of the greatest falsehoods that exists. In fact, they're a boom to our economy. This question is from Cram Della Cram. Why are immigrants more likely to start a business than that of the domestic population? I am a living example of that. My own grandparents came from farms in Germany during the Depression. What did they do as soon as they got here? They created businesses. They saw opportunity because they could employ themselves. They could open up a little store. Immigrants do this because they're driven. Lazy people do not walk across the desert. That's why immigrants are more likely to create businesses. This question from an aimless joy. What is chain immigration? I see people talking about it a lot. Chain immigration is a derogatory term put on family-based immigration by anti-immigration and nativist activists in the United States. The chain is this. You immigrate to America through your job, for example. When you become a citizen, you can sponsor your parent to come to the United States. You can also sponsor a child or a sibling to come to the United States, and they can sponsor their parent, hence the quote, chain immigration. Regular people call it family-based immigration, and family immigration has been the core immigration to the United States since 1952. Over 70% of our visas every year are family-based visas. This question from Adrian Bosco: what is the crime rate of illegal immigrants compared to the general population? Interesting question, because the data is very sparse, and until recently, only one state actually tracked that data, the great state of Texas. Whenever they arrest anyone, they find out their immigration status and they publish those records online for the world to see. Undocumented immigrants commit crimes at a much lower rate than US citizens. Why is that? Well, if you're undocumented, you don't commit crime because you know you'll be caught and sent back to your home country. Despite what you see on the ICE Twitter feed every day, undocumented immigrants are generally law-abiding. They have strong families. They go to church on Sundays. Many own businesses. This question from MM Bren: do illegal immigrants vote in the United States? No, because they can't vote. Undocumented immigrants know they can't vote. In federal elections, only US citizens can vote. In state elections, only US citizens can vote. Sometimes in municipalities, they allow every person resident in that municipality to vote, but for the most part, you have to be a US citizen to vote in the United States. Under President Bill Clinton, we created a law called Motor Voter. When you applied for a license, they registered to vote. Frequently in the 90s and the early 2000s, they registered everybody who got a license, including individuals at the time who were immigrants to the United States. Did a couple of those vote? Yeah. Every year you're talking about, in the entire country, fewer than a couple of dozen people vote illegally. We're constantly in search of a solution to a problem that doesn't exist on illegal voting. This question from Josie Amaguchi: where's Anna Delvey? Better question, who's Anna Delvey? Anna Delvey is from Inventing Anna fame. She had defrauded a number of individuals here in New York, claiming to be a German princess of some kind. Ultimately, she was convicted and served time in state prison and was picked up by ICE at the end of her sentence. She was ordered deported by an immigration judge, but she hired a really good lawyer, me, and we were able to overturn her deportation decision on appeal. She currently awaits a new decision from an immigration judge, not in ICE custody. She was secured release and is living in her apartment. She's currently under ICE detention with an ankle monitor, and occasionally you see her on television. Good luck, Anna. This question from K. Do Right: can ICE arrest people without a warrant? And if so, if they're not wearing a uniform, a badge, or an ID, how are people supposed to trust them? ICE can arrest individuals without a warrant within a 100-mile zone around the entire United States. This includes 70% of the US population. So if you're in New York City, an ICE officer walks up to you on the street and says, show me your papers. Entirely legal for them to do that. They also don't need a warrant to arrest someone who they can positively identify as being in violation of US immigration law. Now, they do need a warrant to enter a home unless they're in active pursuit of an individual. Now, you're seeing today a lot of videos of ICE officers out there with no ID or ID that misstates who they are, the police. ICE is not the police, or refusing to identify themselves as they arrest individuals. But until you have an administration that enforces requirements that they wear uniforms and identify themselves, you will see this continue until Americans get tired of it. There are a number of US citizens that have been arrested because they look foreign. Either they don't speak English very well or they don't have papers with them. In parts of the United States where that is outside the 100-mile zone, what ICE can do is they can surveil locations, for example, an apartment complex mostly populated by immigrants. ICE walks around on their phones with an app with the photos of anyone who's ever given their photo to many DMVs, passports, and immigration. If you come up as somebody in their phone known to be undocumented, they will just arrest you without you saying anything. But our advice as lawyers is you simply remain quiet. If you're not under arrest, you ask, am I being detained? If not being detained, walk slowly away. If they say they're detaining you, you're under arrest, and then you say, I'm not speaking without a lawyer. Don't resist arrest. Don't run away, but you have no obligation to talk to them. ICE did, in January, revoke guidance that prohibited them from going to places like schools and churches and hospitals. They're not going to those places, generally speaking, because there was a lot of pushback and a lot of litigation that was initially filed against the Trump administration for revoking those policies, but they are arresting people outside of schools. So people just don't send their kids to school. This question from Billy Hosness: what is inhumane about ICE deportations? How are they different from Obama's 3 million? Deporting people has been part of our immigration laws. At the same time, the conditions under which individuals are held and the places to which they are sent are inhumane in some circumstances. For example, sending an individual from Vietnam or Cambodia who cannot be deported to their home country to Sudan, a country in the middle of a civil war. That is inhumane, because this is done to punish people in ways that a regular deportation, which is terrible for many people, does not do. Obama is known in the Latino community as the deporter-in-chief. He deported more people than Trump could ever hope to deport because he was, first of all, in for 8 years. But they can't deport people very fast because even immigrants are entitled to due process. That means they're entitled to go in front of an immigration judge and present their case for staying in the United States. The Obama administration weaponized the immigration laws by deputizing sheriffs around the United States who detain people for traffic violations. They would detain them, and then Obama's ICE would arrest them. Keeping people in these immigration facilities, which are not prisons, they are worse. These are holding facilities with nothing but 3 crummy meals a day, generally under very terrible conditions. And people who are stuck there for 3, 4, 5 months eventually give up. That's what Obama was successful at, and what Trump is trying to repeat with places like Alligator Alcatraz and Speedway. They're trying to make it so bad for people, they will just give up their due process rights and leave. This question from Contempathy 916. Are legal immigrants being deported? Absolutely. They're being deported. Legal immigrants are individuals who are in the United States on work visas or travel visas after they go through a process. Now, there's different processes depending on where you are. If you show up at an airport and you have a permanent resident or a green card, but you've been gone for a year, these officers will generally threaten individuals and say, you've been gone too long, I'm taking your green card away and sending you away. If you want to fight this, I'm going to keep you in jail. No permanent resident who's legal wants to stay in jail, so they turn around and go away. Or individuals in the United States, legal permanent residents who, it is found out, obtain their residence unlawfully or who commit a crime. They are absolutely being put into deportation proceedings and being deported. Can they ultimately be deported? Federal courts are ruling against the Trump administration on this and saying, look, the First Amendment trumps the immigration laws. Permanent residents have rights, including First Amendment rights in the United States. Question here from Sad Analyst 4470. Should someone show up to court and risk deportation? This question really focused on the reports that we're seeing of ICE officers in the hallways of immigration court arresting people after they come out of their immigration court hearing. In 1996, while Bill Clinton was president, he signed a law that said anyone who's in the United States less than 2 years can be deported without a trial. This is called expedited removal. These people show up in immigration court because they have a pending asylum case. ICE lawyers are telling the judge, Judge, we no longer want to pursue this person's deportation. We want to cancel the case. So the person walks out thinking, for some reason, not understanding why, their case is canceled. And then they encounter the ICE officer outside who has their name on a sheet and has their picture and says, oh, we're here to arrest you because your case was terminated, and then haul them downstairs in the building and off to an ICE detention center. If that's going to happen to you, should you show up for your deportation hearing? As a lawyer, I have to tell you, you have to show up for your hearing. But are people not showing up for the hearing? Absolutely. Failures to appear are skyrocketing in immigration courts. Because what's worse, not showing up for your court hearing and getting a deportation order, or showing up to your court hearing and being arrested? This question from Throwaway 102013. What should you do if you're a U.S. citizen and get deported by ICE? One, you should call your family and have them talk to reporters right away, because you need to get press on this issue right away. Press solves problems. Has this happened? Absolutely, it's happened. There have been U.S. citizens deported from the United States by accident. What they need to do is go to the U.S. embassy in whatever country they were deported to and say, I'm a U.S. citizen. Here's proof of my U.S. citizenship. If you don't have your passport, which you likely don't, they will give you a travel document to return to the United States. That will not happen overnight. That will likely take weeks, but that absolutely happens today and will continue to happen under the Trump administration. This question from Ask an American. How dangerous is it really crossing the border? Our side of the border in all the cities like El Paso, San Diego, Brownsville, it's very safe. On the Mexican side of the border, that opposite side is dangerous. It is run by gangs. There's extortion, there's rape. People die crossing the border, either because of drowning along the Texas border or die in the desert of thirst, crossing the Arizona and California deserts. I would not recommend it to anybody. It's just very, very dangerous. Question from Yafe Comadre. So if I get deported, what happens to my debt? Nothing happens to your debt. It's still your debt. If you're able to come back one day, that debt will still be there. Likely that debt is tied to a social security number, which you will always have, even if you come back legally 20 years from now. Sorry, This question from MTMMag at Dev52. Thoughts on the differences between jus soli and jus sanguinis, basis for citizenship and nationality, or how they are misused by modern politicians. What do you think is the best form of citizenship? Jus soli means citizenship is based on where you are born, and jus sanguinis is citizenship based on blood or family. The United States has a system based on both. If you are born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen unless your parent is a diplomat. Maybe you don't like that idea. I personally think it's a good idea because it establishes continuity. There are a number of countries around the world, mainly in the Middle East, where if you're born there, you're not a citizen. So there are workers 3 generations old in Saudi Arabia. Their parents were born there. They were born there. They are not Saudi. If they leave for 6 months, they can't go back, which creates stateless people, which creates refugees, which creates broader problems around the world. Oh, this is a great question. This question from No Egg, No Plan. What would revoking birthright citizenship look like? First of all, you could not do it retroactively. What Trump has done is revoke it going forward, saying as of originally February, anybody born in the United States whose parents weren't citizens or permanent residents, even if their parents were legally here, are not citizens of the United States. What would that look like going forward? Creating an entire class of stateless individuals? Our immigration laws don't let those kids sponsor those parents until those parents are out of the country for 10 years. So the parents aren't getting any benefit out of their kids being born here that is any way immediate, because you can't even sponsor your parents until you're 21. At the same time, what are you going to tell the kid? The kid's not going anywhere. Now they won't have papers. Are you going to make them a resident? Are you going to give them a visa? What are you going to do for those kids? This is a terrible idea, whose time I hope will never come. This question from Articos02. How would you define the difference between assimilation and integration? Assimilation is an individual who adopts the mannerisms and the culture of the society in which we come. Integration is just being part of society or the economy. It's not necessarily adopting every characteristic of that society. There's a lot of complaint in 2025 that immigrants don't assimilate. This is simply not true. If you're looking for immigrants the day they get here to start having barbecue in their backyard with hot dogs and hamburgers and abandon their culture that they grew up with and live with for a big part of their lives, you would be going against the entire cultural history of the United States. And it's not like you come to America and are sworn in as a citizen and we say, hey, here's all these classes to teach you to be American. Immigrants come to America and they integrate into our economy through jobs. They integrate into our schools through their kids or through their own education. But assimilation takes time. Sometimes it takes a generation. And if you want to help people, start a class in your area to teach them English. Start a culture class. Do things to help them assimilate. I remember as a child in the 1960s going with my grandparents to German social halls where individuals only spoke German, played German music, had German food. Those social halls do not exist today. Assimilation. A Quora user asked, what happens to all the paper forms you fill out for immigration and customs? I'm sorry, I'm laughing. Because yes, they're still using paper. Now, USCIS, which is the Immigration Service Agency that runs and deals with most of the visas and green cards and citizenship, they are moving towards an online filing system, but there are still billions of paper records in immigration vaults around the world. ICE, on the other hand, ICE is all paper, and it's a paper nightmare. It's actually causing problems for the Trump administration because they can't get the paper processed fast enough to get people into removal proceedings. In respect to data protection in filing paper forms, probably the least protected form of data is a piece of paper, which can be copied or photographed and sent around the world. The USCIS actually has a very robust online filing system that is protected by several different layers and likely complies with every governmental standard around the world for protection of data. It'd be much better for them to move more quickly to online data filing. But the reality is they simply don't have the physical capability of doing that yet. As a follow-up question from Phoenix 2717, can you explain what an F1 visa is and can it be revoked? Well, we just saw a mass revocation by the Trump administration in March and April of this year of a number of F1 visa holders actively studying the United States. The Trump administration ran all 1.4 million students who are here in the United States through the NCIC to see if they'd ever been arrested for anything. And approximately 6,000 fingerprint hits came back. The Trump administration sent out notices, hey, we're revoking your visa because you showed up in the hit. The problem was, and I don't know if you know this or not, but the police do arrest innocent people. And the vast majority of these individuals had no convictions and thus no legitimate basis to have their visas revoked. Lawyers in more than 200 lawsuits around the country in April, including myself and our firm, were able to reinstate these students and get their status put back into place. We are now litigating the actual visa revocation in federal court in Washington, D.C. for these students. Visas can also be revoked if you are convicted of a crime, if you get bad grades, if you take too few classes. All those are reasons to revoke a student visa in the United States. This question from Buddha Bing. What were the main reasons for the age of mass migration from 1850 to the mid-1900s? And we can answer it with this chart. In 1850, we were coming up on the Civil War in the United States. At the time, there were approximately 2.4 million immigrants in the United States, 10% of the US population. Starting in 1865, shortly after the Civil War, our population increased to more than 15% of immigration, doubling during that time frame in actual population. For the next 40 years, immigration continued at a very rapid pace. In 1924, our Congress passed laws that limited legal immigration to the United States from everywhere in the world other than Western Europe. What happened after 1924 up until 1965 is that the percentage of immigrants in America went down. There were no immigrants coming. And we went down to about 5%. But since 1965, with the passage of the Immigration Act and the restoration of worldwide immigration to the United States, our numbers of immigrant population has increased dramatically. While we have many more immigrants in America today than we did in 1860, we have many more people in the United States as well, such that today, the percentage of population is basically a little bit less than it was in 1860, even though we have many more immigrants in America. This next question is from Appropriate Debt 9. How were previous immigration peaks perceived at the time in the United States? People who lived in the United States as Americans in 1910 to 1924 had the same reaction as we're having today, an anti-immigration fervor, because people are generally afraid of things that are new. And when they see signs in Chinese going up, or people in school speaking Spanish to their kids, they get afraid of that. This is human nature, and it's something that America has typically overcome after a period of time. Hopefully, we've learned from our history and will overcome that more quickly today. This question is from Chico Juanito 395. How do undocumented immigrants pay taxes? I would gladly hire undocumented, which by the way would be a crime, but everybody else pays taxes, so you're not getting away with not paying. If you have work authorization documents, that really isn't undocumented, right? Somebody explain like I'm 5. First of all, undocumented immigrants pay billions of dollars in taxes every year in the United States. Not just through income tax, because they do pay income taxes with a tax ID number. These individuals do pay taxes as well on their food. They pay taxes on their rent. They pay property taxes. They pay taxes just like Americans do at every level of society. So undocumented immigrants are not getting away with not paying taxes. And finally, if somebody does have a work authorization document, that means they have the ability to work and have a social security number, and you can hire them and they will pay taxes. Our next question is from Donovan Weiss. What if we just stopped immigration for a year and saw what happened? See how things go, and then we can decide the right balance. Why would that be so terrible? Ask the guy in love with the British woman if he could just wait a couple years to bring her over. Ask the employer who wants to bring in the lead scientist on his project to create thousands of jobs for his company. Ask the family who wants to bring dad to the United States so they can take care of him as he enters Alzheimer's. The reality is we need immigration, and we need it every year. We need to grow our country to remain competitive around the world. You cut that off, and it'll be like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Hopefully, our politicians in 2025 will continue to understand that. That's all the questions for today. Until next time.